It was a concept that appeared seemingly out of nowhere when Coach K first mentioned it last year. Then Rick Pitino started to openly pine for it. Now it's beginning to creep more and more into the conversation surrounding both the Big East and the ACC. Could these two power leagues actually merge? Could it be? Should it be? And what would it mean for Villanova? We discuss next on Holding Over. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Holding Over, part of the Big East Energy Network. I'm Matt Janus with my co-host, David White. David, a happy belated birthday to you. What are you up to now, 45,
Thank
50?
you. I just turned 72, looking to start collecting retirement. Hopefully just sleep on the couch all day. I'd love to.
I see the angle. See the angle you're trying to work there. Well done. Well, hopefully it was a good birthday celebration. We missed you last week. We talked an awful lot of recruiting while you were gone. A little bit of news this week actually just hit earlier today as we record this on Monday night, August the 25th. It is a official visit scheduled for Villanova with Chris Washington Jr., the top 25 recruit in the country, class of 2026. It's a big land potentially for Villanova. We spoke with Jake Weingarten actually not too long ago in an episode that you can click the link above to check out right now. And he talked about the need to try to go after Chris Washington, and how Villanova should really aim all of their recruiting efforts on getting him. And it's a good sign they were able to get an official visit lined up. It still seems to be trending in a good direction there.
I would agree. I think just getting him on campus, getting him around, it's great. I mean, it's a great sign for Kevin Willard and the staff that they can go into those homes, they can have the conversation with those top 25, top 30 recruits and keep the train rolling. I mean, it looked like for a while that the train might derail, and we'll see what happens with him. But just getting the guy on campus for an official visit is huge.
Try to get back into that recruiting at the high school level of the top tier talent. You got to
Mm-hmm.
get the visit, but you also got to land them. That'll be that next stage. We'll see if Kevin Willard and company can do it. Okay, on to our topic of the day. We have moved deep into the summer. Finally, late August, getting close to September, close to the start of basketball season, or excuse me, close to the start of football season. I'm ahead of myself. Still a whole other sport to go. But then basketball is right around the corner. We're getting closer and closer, but still in the silly season. And the silly season means you go deep into the conversation. Well, and Ryan Hammer of the Blue Blood Pod put out an interesting think piece earlier in the week. And it is a think piece on a subject that I've seen creep more and more into the conversation of both Big East and ACC fans, and starting to hear some coaches and maybe even a couple administrators openly discuss the topic: a potential merger between the Big East and the ACC. And Ryan Hammer put together what the plan would look like. It would become the ultimate mega conference. He doesn't want to just join up the Big East and the ACC. He wants to add conference members from the Atlantic 10 to kind of level out the basketball, create a 42-member behemoth, split them into 14 team tiers, and bring relegation into college sports, and have three conferences within one league, and end up having 14 teams each. You can move up, you can move down, but you're all partnered together. David, it's kind of a wild idea. It would reinvent the way college sports work. Is it something that is a good idea for either league?
Short answer, no, probably not. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It would get fans talking. It has us talking about it right now. But I mean, ultimately, for the Big East, I mean, you have your traditional basketball powerhouses. The ACC is all in on football. And quite frankly, the Big East already tried to be a conference that had some teams playing major college football and some teams not playing it, and it failed. So I don't know if this is a situation where if you at first you don't succeed, try again. It seems like we should just let it die.
Well, how about I got two more cliches for you. You know, the old adage, no idea is a bad idea. I think this is a bad idea, the definition of a bad idea. And on top of that, by the way, you know, the old saying, it was a great quote. George Santayana once said, those who do not learn from the past are destined to repeat it. I had a history
Mhm.
teacher who actually taught me that that was on the wall on his classroom. It was his number one thing every day in history class. Then he also proceeded to tell me that Gettysburg wasn't the turning point of the American Civil War. So, you know, you hit some, you miss some, but it is a great quote because in this case, it's especially apropos. You mentioned it, you alluded to it. The Big East had a division right from the very creation of the conference back in the early 80s. But that came in an era when basketball and football carried equal relevance. Now, football is not only king, football is 95% of the game. The
Yeah.
reason this conversation is happening is because the schools that don't play major college football are worried that the football playing schools are going to take their ball and run away and change the game and leave them behind. And I understand that worry. But, and this is a very important thing, at the end of the day, you can acquiesce and you can try to adjust and see if you can meet them halfway. But the football schools are always going to keep moving the ball. And if you keep trying to chase them and compromising with them and partnering with them and hug them tight, it won't work out for you. If you did not learn this from the first time around with the Big East, when are you ever going to learn this? It's the whole reason this iteration of the Big East exists because they got tired of chasing the football schools around. And these were lesser football schools, quite frankly, at this point. Once Syracuse, BC, and Pitt left, they looked in the mirror and said, well, we could partner with South Florida, Louisville, and Cincinnati and
Mhm.
still have some weight with those types of schools, or we can go do our own thing. And I think they wisely chose to go do their own thing. If you're
Yeah.
partnering with major football schools, even a tier below the obviously Alabamas of the world, but I mean, you're talking about North Carolina's coached by Bill Belichick, for God's sakes. You're talking about big brand football schools, Florida State,
Clemson,
Clemson.
Florida
This
State,
is not,
Miami.
yeah, this is not going to work out for these basketball schools long term. And oh, by the way, those basketball schools that you are trying to grab onto, those programs that you want to get back into your fold, they're going to be looking for greener pastures in football. They're going to be trying to take the first exit ramp out and find a life raft in the Big Ten or the SEC. So you're still going to end up in a state of flux anyway. So you're going to change and reinvent the wheel. And what are you going to end up with? Nothing at the end of the day.
Exactly. I mean, I see the desire for it. It would be interesting to have a league that had Villanova, UConn, Georgetown, Duke, Carolina, even Virginia, if they can get it rolling again. It would be interesting for that league to exist. Like, who wouldn't want to see a conference game between Duke and UConn, Nova and Carolina? People would want to see that. Problem is, who wants to see Seton Hall, Wake Forest? Like, is that going to be primetime basketball? I don't think so. And like you said, the football schools, especially the big brands of the ACC, one, they were already mad that the ACC added Stanford, Cal, and SMU, who play big time football. I think Florida State might light themselves on fire if they brought in more teams to just play basketball. For a long time, the ACC, the biggest knock from Florida State and Clemson and even Miami was the ACC focused too much on basketball. The ACC swung the pendulum and said, okay, well, we'll try and focus on football. I think that was a bad decision, but they tried it. And I don't think it's going back to a basketball league.
Well, and in defense of the theory, let's also state that in all likelihood, this would happen in 5 to 6 years, and it would
Mhm.
be after some sort of a schism happens where a Florida State, a Clemson, a North Carolina, potentially, maybe even a Virginia, go and find that new home in terms of football. They go to get themselves into a Big Ten or get themselves into an SEC. And suddenly now you're left with the Dukes, the Wakes, the Syracuses, the BCs, the Pitts, your former brethren inside the Big East. And then obviously, basically, it's an excuse to try to get Duke into the fold would be, I think, the biggest positive for the Big East. You get Syracuse, Pitt, BC, who are kind of those like-minded institutions that you were originally partnered with back, and then you bring a big name like a Duke into the fold. And that sounds good, but you still run into the same problem of half the schools will have football. They're not going to stop playing football because they're still going to be hoping for that invitation to a major conference on the gridiron. Look at UConn. There's no better example than that. How many times have they openly flirted with the Big 12, hoping to maybe even get an invitation into the ACC if anything shook out with the Florida State departure that was always being rumored to happen until they finally came to that compromise over the offseason and moved up the date for the exit fees going down dramatically. But they are openly looking for an escape hatch. Why wouldn't these other schools do that unless you set up such a sweetheart deal for them that they're making a lion's share of the money? And if you're now in a conference with football schools that have more revenue coming in and are getting more of a part of the share in terms of the revenue for the schools, how are you going to compete? You're now in the same exact situation as you are right now, except for you're competing against them inside the conference instead of just on the national stage once you get to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my point too, is the football schools are not going to share their revenue with the non-football playing schools. So you're still going to be behind all the football revenue. Now you're fighting for NCAA bids with teams who have football revenue, so therefore are ahead of you in NIL and other things. I don't think it works out for the Big East. But like you said, if in the next 5 years, there's a big shift in Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Carolina, maybe Virginia are gone to the SEC or Big Ten. Even if you're Duke, do you stay or do you go do one of those deals that Oregon, Washington did where they get a partial share of whatever the Big Ten's doing? Because I think the Big Ten would be willing to take Duke at a discount to bring the basketball tradition. So at that point, are you gaining anything in basketball if the two biggest basketball names are now gone from the ACC?
Well, and look, this is also the question. In this hypothetical, there's two ways that this could work. It could work under the current iteration of the ACC. And in that case, it's such a have versus have not situation. And the revenues are going to be so wildly variant. It doesn't make any sense for the basketball schools to join up, in my mind, because they're going to demand such vastly differing revenue streams that you're not going to be able to long-term keep up and compete. Or B, is it when the Super League happens and they keep accruing teams, the Big Ten and the SEC, break away and do their own thing, and now the rest of these schools are kind of left scurrying and try to figure out what the deal is. Okay, under that scenario, you could make an argument that it makes a lot more sense. But now you're reinventing the entire wheel of college sports at that point, right? Super League's going to throw all the current rules out the window. So this 42-team conglomerate that we're talking about might theoretically make some sense. You know what would make a lot more sense at that point? You blow it all up and you figure out geographic, sensible conferences so these kids aren't going all over the country to play schools that, while they are like-minded, and I mean, the Big East has a great partnership and a great rapport and a really deep, I think, connection in terms of what these institutions are trying to accomplish, what they're trying to get out of college athletics. The thing they don't have in common in any way, shape, or form is geography. And geography is what is really hurting so many of these athletic budgets because it's expensive to travel all over the country, not just in men's basketball, but in women's basketball, in all the Olympic sports. This adds up. Who knows what it looks like in 5 to 10 years? The entire model might be just scrapped and start anew. But if you're going to scrap it and start anew, why don't you scrap everything? Keep your most important rivalries, but then build conferences with like-minded brands that make geographic sense. That seems like it would be a much better idea than just glopping together two big bunches of schools and saying, all right, you're gonna move you up and down. We're gonna relegate you. You're not gonna be able to figure out what your athletic budget is from year to year until you find out how many games you win. It just doesn't seem like it. It seems like an idea that conceptually, boy, that would be cool if you could do it. I don't know if it would be good, but it would be cool. But I don't see any way, shape, or form under the current model that it could even begin to become a reality.
Well, basketball just unfortunately doesn't bring in enough money anymore. Like you said, back 10, 15 years ago when football and basketball were about on the same level. I mean, football has always made more money just based off of butts and seats in football stadiums. But okay, it made more sense. If it's a 60-40 split, we can spend a little bit on basketball. We're losing a little bit in revenue, but we'll be able to make it up. Now it was 80-20, if that.
95-5. 95-5, let's be honest.
So there's not enough money there. And then if a super league happened in football, I mean, I've told you 20 million times, my idea would be all football teams just go independent, play each other, form that whatever college football league it is with the college football czar that does everything as one conglomerate. If that were to happen, there's no reason for a Big East-ACC merger. At that point, you go back to geographical conferences that make sense for every other sport. The Pac-12 probably comes back. The old Big East comes back. Maryland comes back into the ACC. Like, that's what happens because nobody wants the Rutgers volleyball team flying cross country to play UCLA on a Tuesday night to get back to class for Wednesday class. Like, that's crazy. So you go back to geographic conferences where you can do a 2 to 4 hour trip and be home. So I don't see it, whether football stays the way that it is right now or football eventually breaks off to do its own thing. In neither case, I don't see it making much sense.
You know, it's funny because Rick Pitino has been the guy that's been most open in terms of active coaches talking about the need to think outside the box and the need to do this. I mean, he went on John Rothstein's podcast and flat out said, I mean, kind of got into the Big East leadership a little bit, talking about how they don't think enough outside the box. They need to be creative in an ever-changing landscape of college athletics. Well, I don't necessarily agree with him in terms of the Big East leadership's fault on this front, but I do think that there is a need to think outside the box. I just don't think this is the outside the box idea that you should be thinking of. And you're also trying to think of an idea to solve a problem that you don't even know what the problem is going to be, how severe, how different everything is going to need to be, how it's going to all work with Title IX. You're just throwing darts in the dark if you put this together. And I mean, he just was adamant that it should be happening now. These conversations need to begin, and we need to start to move in this direction. And his points, the things that he discusses in terms of the upside, bigger brands in basketball, the ability to to tie yourself to familiar rivals for some of the Catholic schools inside the league, to get back with a Syracuse, to get back with a Pitt, to get back with a Boston College, obviously, would be a big deal. But it does not address the fact that the football and basketball divergence is still there, how any of the revenue would work. And then on top of that, and I think this is something that is worth pointing out as well, the haves and have-nots inside the Big East and with NIL. Are there problems in the Big East right now? There's no doubt about it. There are. Some of these schools, these programs have got to figure NIL out. they are behind and they are falling behind. Seton Hall is a prime example of that. When Kevin Willard was there just a half decade ago, they were on the verge, knocking on the door every year, trying to get to the Sweet 16, trying to be that top 15, top 20 program that they were oh so close to becoming, and that they were most years in the regular season. And now they're just perennially, looking like they're going to be a bottom of the league type of team because they can't put together a roster. That's not a good thing for the league. Xavier, unable to hold on to a guy like Sean Miller, who they literally resurrected his career. I still think, I understand how much money Sean Miller got to leave, but I thought he owed Xavier a little bit more loyalty to that than that. No one wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole when he got let go at Arizona. All the things that were surrounding him in terms of the Adidas news and the shirking of the rules. And I understand there are no rules anymore. We don't care about that stuff as much. But he also was caught telling some bold-faced lies over and over again. That was the part that really reflected poorly upon him. And yet he comes to Xavier. He does a nice job for Xavier, but never really wins anything of note. I mean, Chris Mack had him as a 1 seed 6 or 7 years ago. Sean Miller just had him sneaking into the tournament, winning a game. That was it. And he bolts the first opportunity to leave. But then they lose their entire roster. We'll see what Rick Pitino is able to do there long term. If he is able to learn from his mistakes at Minnesota, and if he does learn from those mistakes at Minnesota. But you can't have a conference where, UConn is at one level. St. John's has a rich benefactor that'll pay for everything. Villanova has money. Georgetown seems to finally have found some money that they're willing to put out there. And then a bunch of mid-tier teams. Creighton's not going to have Coach Mack forever. I mean, I think Creighton has been remarkable in what they've been able to accomplish. They get so little respect compared to what they have deserved and earned on the court. But you wonder how much of that is McDermott. And he has named his head coach in waiting. He says he's going to coach a few more years. But the scuttlebutt seems to be that it's not going to be much longer. And
well,
how
it doesn't seem like any coaches really want to stick around, especially coaches who came up in an era where there was no NIL, there was not a one-time transfer rule.
Right.
Once your guys were on campus, you had them for 3 years before the NBA put the one and done rule in, because if you didn't go out of high school, most of the time you stayed at least 3 years. But I would say another thing that people haven't thought about in this merger is, what does the regular season look like? What does the conference tournament look like? Here's the facts of the matter. If this were a merger that involves Carolina and Duke, they're not going to give up playing each other twice a year.
Right.
So now, and if Villanova and UConn become like rivals and that's a twice a year thing, if you get Carolina, Duke, Nova, UConn on a schedule 1 year, do you want that schedule versus another schedule where you play maybe one of those teams and you have a better shot at the NCAA tournament because now you're not playing the top of the league? The other thing is, I mean, the Big East is so tied to Madison Square Garden, and I understand it. It is a great place to play basketball. It makes sense.
Come on. Tournament would be at Madison Square Garden. It's not going to go to North Carolina ever again. The ACC tried to move it to Madison or to New York. And even the Big Ten tried to. If you can hold your conference tournament at Madison Square Garden, you are holding your conference tournament.
I'm telling you, there is only one
Garden.
school. There are 2 or 3 schools that want the tournament in New York. Syracuse, BC, and Duke. Because Duke, New York is basically Durham North. Nobody else, North Carolina doesn't want to go play in New York. The home court advantage that they get in Charlotte and Greensboro for a tournament, why would they sign up to be like, okay, let's get rid of that home court advantage that we're going to have if we play in the state of North Carolina?
And that is part of that is why this will never end up happening, because I do think North Carolina would have sway and be able to kind of to try to pull their weight. But at the same time, I just can't imagine the money. I mean, look at the success the Big East has had at Madison Square Garden. They sell out in New York every single year. And not only do they sell out, but in terms of real people in seats, that is 90% full most of the sessions. It has been a remarkable success story. Then if you could add to it brand names of getting back to Syracuse, a local school quasi like a Pittsburgh, a BC, where it's a quick train ride down, and then the brands of Duke and North Carolina, that would be the biggest thing I would be looking forward to in this monstrosity. Watching whatever the Big East-ACC is called play at Madison Square Garden in March.
Here's the problem that I foresee, and the Garden is the Garden. It's the mecca of basketball. It's great. I love it. But if UConn and Duke were to play in a Big East-ACC conference championship game, I could see the Garden being about 50-50 there. If it were Carolina and UConn, it's 70-30 at best. UConn's going to – so there's no reason for North Carolina to say, hey, let's go up there. Let's not have any fans. They're just not there. The UConn fans, the Big East fans are entrenched in the North. That's where they are.
I'm talking to David White, North Carolina graduate. You see the degree behind him over his head. You want to make sure that North Carolina has the home court advantage every year. Or you take your ball and go home.
Yeah, for sure.
At least you're honest about it. I give
you unless North Carolina is in the SEC or the Big Ten. Yeah, we're gonna throw our weight around.
Man, that's wild to me that you would think that they would go after playing a conference tournament at Madison Square Garden. Any other place, I would agree with you. If it was Barclays, I thought that was stupid. If it was even when they go to Washington, D.C., doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It is a conference of North Carolina. But if they partnered with these Northeast schools and you have an opportunity every year to spend, now I don't know how long it would take. Obviously, again, the plan that Ryan Hammer kind of got from the inside and part of his imagination, part talking to people from the Blue Bloods pod, he put out on Twitter last week, it would be 42 teams. You'd have to come up with some sort of a relegation plan. So they would be split into 3 different leagues. So it would still be a 14-team conference tournament. You think that if you would not play that at the Mecca, that would be utter insanity to me. And that's the beauty.
I agree. I think it would be silly not to play it there. I don't think that Carolina wants to sign up for that, though.
So that would be just to avoid having to have that argument, they would be against it. This is pure fiction. I think we all know this is pure fiction. And again, we've seen history repeating it over and over again. I understand the idea of thinking outside the box, just doesn't seem realistic. Remember, football, basketball, the chasm has been there for decades. I mean, this dates all the way back. The Big East had its heyday in the 80s, but early in that heyday, before it had even reached its apex, where they got the 3 Final Four teams in 85, and of course, Villanova won their national championship in the miraculous win against Georgetown on April Fools. But even before that, they knew they had a problem, and Dave Gavitt went to the athletic directors and he said, we have a chance to partner with Penn State. Joe Paterno wants to start a Northeast League in football. We can bring Penn State in, make them a member. It'll raise their other programs, which are drastically behind, believe it or not, the Big East schools, considering when you look at the other programs that Penn State has now. Men's basketball is still a mess. Women's basketball has been a mess for 10 years. But all their other programs are elite now. They would, it's just wild how much things have changed. But the argument was, we'll help them raise up all their other programs, and they'll be the flagship partner we need in football. And that way, if Syracuse, if Pitt, if BC can tie themselves to Penn State, they'll never get a wandering eye. They will always want to stay, and then we'll surround them with some fellow football playing members to fill out the rest of the league. And the ADs, led by Georgetown's athletic director, had a contentious meeting and said, no, we are not going to do this. We are a league built on big markets, and we want to stay basketball-centric. We'll figure something out for Syracuse, Pitt, and BC, which they eventually did. About a half decade later, they would bring Miami into the league, which, by the way, was one of the dominoes that started it all falling apart when they went to the ACC in the 90s. But that meeting, so many people point to it as the timer starting on the demise of the old Big East. Once they didn't let Penn State in, that was what kind of started the ticking time bomb. If history changes and they let Penn State in, do you think everything's different? Do you think the Big East stays together in some form? Or do you think football was always going to become too big a problem to overcome?
I think football's too big a problem to overcome, especially if you're not willing to put any money into football. Like, these schools have football programs. I mean, at least Georgetown has stayed consistent. UConn should be the most mad at Georgetown when the whole ACC came in and took Syracuse, Pitt, BC, and all those other teams. If Georgetown had just agreed to throw some money into football, the ACC would have taken Georgetown and UConn to keep the football conference at an even number. And basketball, I mean, Notre Dame was still in for basketball, all other sports but football. But at least Georgetown has remained consistent that they don't want to put money into that football program to make them into a power program.
Well, and remember, when the Big East was in a state of flux, that was one of the things Mike Tranghese came up with. He went to Villanova and said, look what UConn did. Follow the UConn model. Put money into your football program. That was why, for a while, Villanova played some games at the Union Stadium down in Chester to try to figure out if that maybe could work and could be kind of a building block towards seeing if they could put more funds behind it and get it to a passable level and try to save basketball through moving football up. Because, you could argue that the ACC would have had some interest in getting into a potential Philadelphia market as well. They needed because they were losing Maryland. They had to figure out something, or you would think that at the time, with the way TV deals worked and markets being so important, that you would have wanted to fill the void in Washington, D.C. But Philadelphia would have been a good option as well. And Nova decided against it. And there was a lot of inner conversations there. I don't think that was a clean decision. I think that they went back and forth for a little while, but it just wasn't going to be worth the investment long term. And also, quite honestly, I think they rightfully figured if we spend money on football, it's going to take money away from men's basketball. And if we stop spending as much money on men's basketball, this really likable head coach that we have by the name of Jay Wright, he might start to pick up the phone when all these other jobs that he keeps getting offered are bevied his direction. And so they decided to make what ended up being the smartest decision, by the way, in the history of the school. Because, I mean, UConn, it ended up okay for them. They got a lifeline to come back to the Big East, and then they got Danny Hurley, and look at what they've been able to do ever since. But how many years did they spend wandering the wilderness to try to find a home in the American Athletic Conference? And that could have very easily been Villanova, with, by the way, a worse football program, because they would have been further behind in terms of putting money into it than UConn was.
Yeah, no, I think that it's hard to look back and say at that time, 20, 30, however long it was ago, that, hey, we're going to plant money into football when football and men's basketball are closer. Obviously, when the ACC came, what was that? Mid-2000s? When was that?
It started in the early aughts, and then it fell apart in the late aughts.
Yeah. At that time, it looked like football was starting to separate itself, so we got to start looking at things. I don't know. It's hard to know where the dominoes fall. What do you do? Do you put more money into men's basketball and leave football to the side? Do you put more money into football, ultimately bringing in more revenue, but also most of that revenue going right back into football? 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. I thought for Georgetown, or Nova for that matter, when that happened, if you plant money into football and you make the ACC like guarantee you at least one home game against Clemson, Florida State, or even Notre Dame, who was a conference partner, you're going to sell out that game for a lot of money. You're probably going to get a lot of TV revenue off of that game. And you can probably slowly build up your football program to not be a good program, but just like a decent one. You don't need to be great. You could be Vanderbilt and still pump a lot of money into basketball. Not that Vanderbilt does that, but I mean, I thought for a lot of those Catholic schools, and I mean, this is my ACC bias, but I thought like the Duke model was the model that a lot of them should have followed. Hey, we have football. We don't really care about them, but we have it.
I think if this had happened 30 years earlier, I think it would have been easier to do. But at this point, you'd have been so far behind in terms of infrastructure, in terms of building. I just don't think you would have ever been able to catch up. And the perfect example is UConn. I mean, UConn almost bankrupted their athletic department chasing football. Let's not forget that. It's easy to look at it with rose-colored glasses now because, again, Danny Hurley came around and really bailed them out of a disastrous spot. And the Big East threw them the ultimate life raft by letting them come back into a Northeast conference that they desperately needed to be able to get the kind of kids that they had recruited under Jim Calhoun. And all those things coming together have at least given them the opportunity between men's basketball and women's basketball where they're back on solid ground now. But nobody wants to touch that football program with a 10-foot pole, except for the commissioner of the Big 12. He seems to be the only guy that has any interest. None of the other schools in the Big 12 want any part of UConn. But he keeps going to the well saying, guys, we want to brand ourselves as the best basketball conference. Look at what UConn does. Men's basketball, women's basketball. Their football program will just kind of grin and bear it. Let's let them in. And they keep voting no. And they hadn't even gotten to the point where Memphis tried to buy their way in. Maybe UConn can try that method down the road at some point. But you're in a spot where you're probably better suited than some of the other schools in the Big East right now because you have that card that you can play depending on how things evolve. But you're also in no man's land, and you're spending so much money on football. I mean, UConn is paying Jim Moore a lot of money, and the number of scholarships you're throwing into that, the money that they put into Rensselaer Field up there to rebuild it and make it an FBS compliant facility and to try to compete at the top level if that invitation came is astronomical. And we have seen
to be an independent and you're not guaranteed those 8 or 9 games where you don't have to pay anything. If you want to win, you got 5 games of pay games. Like that's a lot of money you're putting out to get somebody to come up and hopefully win a game, or you're gonna schedule like a Wake Forest. Somebody, I keep picking on Wake Forest today, apparently. But you're gonna schedule
or Devin Deeks.
You're going to schedule a lower conference opponent who, looks good if you win, but not that good. So what do you do there? Do you keep buying wins, or do you just say, hey, if we go 6-6 with wins over, I don't know, I won't say Wake Forest anymore. But if you go 6,
the other teams in the ACC, I'm starting to wonder.
Nope, Wake Forest.
Only the teams you haven't taken a shot at NC State yet, by the way.
Oh, I mean that's just too easy. Low-hanging fruit. Oh, those NC State fans, they are delusional.
By the way, while we were talking football, we mentioned Penn State earlier. We should point out Mark Ferrante's team will play Penn State a couple of weeks. This is a football podcast, but that game likely not to go all that well for Villanova. Obviously, Penn State ranked number 2 right now in the AP poll. But just wanted to point out James Franklin's non-conference schedule that he put together, the 3 games that he's playing outside of the Big Ten. The hardest game based off of the Sagarin rating is Villanova. They are the highest ranked non-conference opponent for James Franklin's Penn State team, really testing themselves outside of Big Ten play this year.
Well, we'll see how Big Game James does this year. If he can win a big one, until he does it, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I don't think Villanova fans probably should be holding their breaths either to pull that up. But it'll be a fun experience to go up there to Happy Valley. They did it a few years ago, get to do it again. Speaking of pulling off upsets and coming through in big spots, we got a cool guest coming up later in the week. We are going to welcome in a Villanova basketball national champion as we are going to bring in one of the members of the 1985 national championship team. David, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this. Is a guy who, a little younger and well-schooled on his basketball history, but obviously grew up an ACC-centric mindset. The time of 3 Big East teams in the Final Four, and Villanova pulling off the upsets of all upsets, 1985, from a guy that didn't grow up around this area or around the Big East. What do you know about that 85 championship game between Nova and Georgetown?
It was a dogfight. I not much. I'll be real honest with you. I know 82. I know 83. 85 is escaping me right now.
Well, that's good because we're going to give you a homework assignment. We're going to make sure that you go back and watch that game, and you're going to watch this next episode of Holding Over because we're going to welcome in Chuck Everson, who came in off the bench, had a big moment in that national championship game that all Villanova fans remember. He got shoved, cheap shotted right at the end of the half. Raleigh Massimino going nuts looking for a technical foul. He went to every single official. They all ran away from him, ran to the locker room, and Raleigh was so incensed, he fired up. He did a big fist pump as he went into the locker room, and it's still a goosebump moment for any Villanova fan that was old enough to remember that. It was still a talking point for all the old Wildcats, and we're going to relive that memory with Chuck Everson, but we're also going to talk to him, David, about the concept of, this is the first time in a long time that Villanova has gone outside of the family for a hire. In fact, the last time they did it was when they hired Raleigh Massimino back in the 70s. So it's different for the alums. And we're going to ask Chuck about that difference and how Kevin Willard has been in terms of welcoming back the former players, because that's such an important part of the heritage and the tradition inside this program. And it's just a little different now because Steve Lapis was on that 85 staff and worked with Raleigh. Jay Wright, of course, was such a protege of Raleigh Massimino and grew up a Villanova fan. Kevin Willard has said all the right things, but he is an outsider, and he made his bones on the Rick Pitino tree, and then worked at Seton Hall and then Maryland. So it's just got to be a little bit of a different feel, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, sometimes going outside of the family is the best thing you can do. If nobody in the family is ready to take over, sometimes you guys say, hey, let's go get that guy. But it is a different feel. It's going to be a different program that Willard's going to bring. He's obviously going to keep some of the tradition from the past. But, yeah, I mean, he's a different guy. He's not the same person, and I think that should be exciting for Nova fans.
Chuck, also the host of the great podcast, Big East Rewind, where he just sits down and talks to Big East legend after Big East legend. If you like old school Big East basketball, that's the one to check out. And so we'll talk to Chuck about his memories of 85, obviously behind the scenes. He's told those stories so many times, but we'll try to find some different angles that we could take with him and kind of relive what it was like to be a national champion and to shock the world like that, what his connection is to the program these days, and how it's been to talk to so many basketball legends here these last few years doing that Big East Rewind show. So really looking forward to it. We hope to get it out end of this week, and we will talk to you then. David, happy belated birthday, and we appreciate that you remembered to join us again. I was worried you got a little bit older that you were going to remember the show was tonight.
I had to put a reminder on my phone. It's like when I say take my pills, now I have to say record.
That's all right. I almost forgot about the show too. I got the Ryder Cup shirt on, trying to figure out whether Keegan Bradley is going to pick himself. Has consumed all my thoughts here the last 48 hours. But until then, for David White, I'm Matt Janus. We're part of the Big East Energy Network. We hope that you will like the show and subscribe to the Big East Energy Network. Also, check us out on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and where everybody says on these YouTube videos, if you like the video, it helps us out. It really does actually help, as it turns out. You make some traction in the algorithm, so please hit that like button if you don't mind. Tell a friend. Get tuned in, holding over. We're going to be here all season long, talking Villanova basketball. Going to start to ramp up the volume of shows as well as we get closer and closer to the season. For David, I'm Matt. We will talk to you real soon. Good show coming up later in the week. This was fun. As Holding Over, we'll be back.